This panel will be discussing esports betting growth in the USA. As legalized and regulated sports wagering in the US continues to develop, we'll now take a look at the esports side.
Hello, testing. Okay. Hey everyone, thank you for coming and welcome to the panel. My name is Cody and we're going to be talking about esports betting in the US today. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, esports betting is a very fast-growing segment of the gambling industry. And in 2020 specifically, this sort of piece of the space in gambling was very much accelerated by the pandemic when all the traditional sports leagues went offline. Obviously, there was no Major League Baseball, hockey, football to wager on anymore. So while gaming had its own surge, sports books had also turned to gaming and esports as a way to keep the lights on, and bettors turned to esports as a means to keep having a flutter as one of the only live competitive sports that was still around, other than Belarus table tennis, if you're into that. So yeah, and then a lot of that momentum has carried on to today. We've seen DraftKings partner with the likes of Facebook. We had Entain acquire Unicorn, which is a very big acquisition in the space. And today we have roughly a dozen US states that have legal esports wagering, which include Connecticut, New Jersey, Colorado, and even right here in DC. So today we're just going to be talking a little bit about the space and the sector and kind of where we are today, what are the headwinds, tailwinds generally. And yeah, we'll just kind of dig right in without further ado. So I'd love to just go around the room. We could start with Brett and we'll have the panelists introduce themselves.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Brett Abarbanel. I'm the Director of Research at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas International Gaming Institute, and I'm an affiliate researcher at the University of Sydney Gambling Research and Treatment Clinic.
Hi, I'm Jason Chung. I'm the head of the esports practice at Zuber, Lawler, LLP, a law firm, and we are delighted to actually have co-authored the 2021 esports betting report with ESI. So that's available on the marketplace on the ESI website. Just a small plug for Sam.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Martin Lycka. I will not bore you with my way too long job title. In essence, I'm with Entain, and by implication, Unicorn, that indeed we acquired last year. And amongst other things, I look after Entain's esport-related regulatory matters. I suppose that's what we'll be talking about. Thanks for sticking around. I appreciate that this is perhaps not the sexiest of topics, but we'll do our best to entertain you.
Sexiest of people.
Thank you, Artie. So my name is Vlastimil Venclik. I'm CEO of Odin GG. We focus on esports data analytics, and we believe that the US will be one of the biggest markets. So happy to be here on the panel. Thank you, guys.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So I'd love to just kind of start, where I'd mentioned at the top of the panel here, which is the pandemic, right? That was kind of a defining moment for esports betting in a lot of ways and kind of helped spur a lot of the movement that we're seeing today and a lot of the progression. So I'd love to just kind of go around the room, and Vlastimil, we could start with you at the end and hear, what effect did the pandemic have on this sector and how has it impacted it today?
Yeah, the pandemic has a tremendous effect on the esports wagering betting because there was nothing to bet on, right? All the events was canceled, postponed, so only the esports saved the bookmakers, and it definitely helped the field growth of esport, of more events. Operators need to integrate and start thinking how to work with the esport communities, how to properly monetize esport and find the good partners who can help them with monetization, engagement, and other things. So it really accelerated the growth by 2-3 years, and we see these numbers on the increased handle on everything. So I would say it was one of the defining moments for esports wagering, maybe for esports as such.
I promised my fellow panelists that I will start stirring up controversy, so I could easily echo Vlastimil's comments. And yes, I do agree with what he said. At the same time, and I'm not taking an issue, but in my view, the rise of esports and esports betting has been largely inevitable. It's what the younger generations love doing, and even those of us who are no longer younger generations are part of that. 20 years ago, never on a professional level, so I wouldn't have called it esports, but I did play games. So we had to, in my view, reach a point whereby esports betting would become a fixture. And indeed, the pandemic has sped the whole process up, because otherwise, brushing aside online casino games, the only markets that we could offer, at least at the peak of the pandemic, besides esports, were the likes of Angolan ping pong and the third division of Belarusian handball. And you would have been amazed, and might have been what people would have bet on at that point, but indeed this did help the rise of esports and betting on esports.
Yeah, I agree with you, Martin. I mean, ultimately it was inevitable, right? Especially with the overturn of PASPA. I mean, obviously sports betting is growing, and esports betting was going to grow along with that. But the pace of what happened is incredible, right? Because state governments were desperate for revenues. So where do they look? Well, they look for betting. They look for other entertainment options. They want cold hard cash to come through their state coffers, right? So you'll notice that the taxation is really well built out. They carved out a nice little sort of fund for themselves as part of the legalization of sports betting, esports betting. And that's going to continue just because every state right now in the wake of the pandemic needs more revenue. So Brett would know more about that in Nevada.
Nevada,
sorry.
So,
We can never get that right, Brad. We're sorry.
if you sound like my Jewish New York grandmother, you're saying it right.
That's a compliment.
Yes, it is. She's wonderful. Yes. So I agree. I know, but I'm going to add my own twist, right? Why not? We've spoken quite a bit about some of the metrics behind this, and I think the cultural element is so key as well. As this incredible growth has happened, and I would even call it then, after this incredible growth, an incredible plateau that would follow. But what really stuck around was broader understanding of what esports is. I wouldn't be so bold as to state that everybody I speak to now in the gambling world gets esports. Such a statement would be foolish. But to recognize that this is something that is a major contributor to the gambling world, and on the other side of things, that gambling ends up being a major contributor to the esports and games world. And I'm very specifically using the term contributor because it specifically is a neutral connotation. In some ways, it's a very positive contributor. In other ways, it can be a very negative contributor to that space. And I think that one of the big things that the pandemic did when esports in general was really brought to the forefront of popular culture, particularly in about April, May 2020, was that it really made more people understand that it exists in a meaningful way. We weren't just saying, oh yeah, look at these schmucks who went over to the arena and watched a game with 20,000 other nerd fans. We really recognized that people are consuming this happily in their own home in a way that, for example, only the people in the room would have probably recognized in the past.
Yeah, those are all excellent points. And Brett's yours about the culture and the understanding around esports, and just that exposure period over the last 2 years, I think was very important for traditional operators that may have not been experimenting with esports in the past. I think that was really big. And to Martin's point, Mongolian ping pong is really a thrilling sport to watch if you ever get a chance. So again, I'd just love to go around the room, and Brett, we can kick off with you here just to hear like general what you think on what are the headwinds and tailwinds right now in this sector that we are kind of seeing.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, this could be the rest of the panel, right? So I'll limit myself. I'm going to go with two things I consider to be both headwinds and tailwinds, which are stigma and ignorance. I think that largely, when I say stigma, I'm talking about the stigma associated with gambling. When I throw out to this room full of people who are largely here from esports backgrounds, if I say, what do you think of when you think of gambling? I bet I'm going to see 100 different answers in this room. When you think of, we got LootBet as our sponsor here, LootBet, the wager they might take on, say, the League of Legends World Championship, gambling. Do you think of perhaps at Evo, if I slap down $5 and Jason and I sit down to play Street Fighter and you probably win, take those $10 as you go, is that gambling? Is it gambling if then at Evo we go up to the President's Suite and that's maybe where we can slap down $1,000 each instead of $5? Is that gambling. So all of these come together, right? Is it microtransactions and loot boxes? All these different things contribute to some of that stigma and ignorance of what is and isn't gambling. Because in many cases, it is, but whatever jurisdiction you happen to be in might say yes, might say no, might say maybe. And at the same time, then the headwind that this can contribute to means that it's possible to take advantage of some of these things. And I don't mean in the sense of some sort of unethical means of taking advantage. I mean there's an opportunity for education in a way that we haven't really had before. We've had this cultural movement where now there's much more exposure and understanding of esports. And now the moment is here to be able to take that exposure and understanding and spread that more into what gambling is. And again, going back to what I said before, where it can positively contribute and where to make sure that we're not negatively contributing to the well-being of esports as an ecosystem.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Brett. And in terms of the tailwinds, you know, the understanding, the investment community understanding more about esports and its value proposition has been great. Where I also agree with you is the headwinds, right? One of the things we did with the esports gambling report, sponsored, you know, we went through all 50 states and territories, and then we went to see what is the process by which the regulators and the laws enable esports betting, right? And part of the problem is that in each of the different states, the mechanism is different, right? So you got to talk to different stakeholders, and that's very confusing, first of all. And then second of all, even if you talk to the right stakeholders, they may or may not know anything about esports, or sports even for that matter, right? So for instance, if you go to Arkansas, it's their racing commission that's going to have to do it, right? And the racing commission is used to greyhounds, right? What do they know about esports, right? So you have to do an education process to tell them exactly what esports is, first of all, and then you have to explain to them the various titles and how do we, you know, how do you capture integrity and all that kind of stuff in there. And that, Brett will tell you, is a process, right? And that's a very hard educational process. And it's also but you have to do it because the regulators actually have control over whether you can actually offer it or not. So there's a lot of states on the books where esports betting is legal, quote unquote, but you know, can you bet on it? Not really, because the regulators have figured their way around it, and that's a major headwind right now.
I take it will have to be virtual greyhounds for the Arkansas Racing Commission then, and in all honesty, I'm not sure that I would want to challenge Brett. Look at the passion and the grit in any sporting, including esports competition. But to answer the question, finally, I suppose in terms of the tailwinds, or the key tailwind is the consumer demand and the interplay, the ever-increasing interplay between esports and betting on esports. Esports, and I'll be preaching to the choir, is these days being largely recognized as one of the sports which does help even from the regulatory perspective. I will not bore you with any definitions, but usually most countries around the world and states in this country that have regulated sports betting, sports is the key word, and as soon as esports is recognized as such, the path to regulation is far smoother. At the same time, and for once I will agree with my fellow panelists, indeed, the headwind is, in practical terms, that you've got to go, and I've been exposed to it myself, for starters in the traditional gambling industry. I've been in the gambling industry for 13 years by now. That probably shows my age and all the white hair. The lack of understanding at the regulators' end. That's something to grapple with in the most elegant and nicest possible way. And I reckon most regulators, they do tie themselves over to understanding what betting on a football or a hockey game is. But all of a sudden, to your point, you're telling them, well, there are a couple of characters running around, shooting and sniping at one another. Oh, is that even a game? Oh, that's what my grandkids play in the garage, and you can bet on that. So I believe that's one of the headwinds, but you know, starting with Nevada, you guys are addressing it, New Jersey are addressing it, and that's the way forward. Yeah. Be open-minded.
Yeah, I just can repeat what was said here, like the regulation and education of regulators is like a really important thing, and they really are getting it, but it will take some time before the esports betting is fully legal in all states, and then the education of regulators is important. And we are speaking about esport, but it's not one sport. It's like dozens of different games, titles, and now we have e-soccers, e-FIFA, Madden, and so on. And is it e-sport? Like regulators understand it, so should be a little betting on it, and so on. So there are different flavors and different kinds of discussion with regulators, not just the, League of Legends, CS:GO, but these titles and so on. So, and they understand it, and they are working on this, but it will take some time. So I think this is one of the main, let's say, obstacles in the esports betting industry right now. What's good and what's changing is the approach of bookmakers. They really see the growth of esports in the US, and they understand they need to do something with it, and they are looking for solutions how improve their offering and how to actually make their sites more interesting for younger audience and so on. So there's a big space for growth in esports for bookmakers, and they want to be part of this.
I'd love to add on to that point as well. We talked quite a bit in this session, in the last session, and I think every single session that preceded it over the last 2 days about the relationship between sports and esports and how sports is not a singular thing, esports is not a singular thing. And I think even beyond that, one of the things that we really need to be able to communicate is what esports is, even without getting into the nitty-gritty of what individual titles are. A lot of the different gambling regulators, especially, that you will speak to, do not think about this in terms of, okay, well, there's individual titles. It's more about, okay, esports as this holistic thing. Mm-hmm. So esports, spectatorship of competition, perhaps betting on that competition. But also, for example, there are multiple regulators I've spoken to who will look at, for example, there's a scandal from 2 days ago now. XQC gambling once again on his stream. That's on Twitch? Oh, so it's esports. And that's the kind of attitude that you're really going to have to get over. When I talk about stigma and ignorance, it's more than just understanding that there's many different games that exist within esports, because a lot of what they're thinking about is not just the good actors. We're not looking at people who are operating these sports books with licenses. We're also looking at people who are including gambling in what they do more broadly, and then pulling it into the esports ecosphere.
Yeah, so for everybody in this room, yes, it's self-evident that esports is multiple things, multiple titles, multiple genres. But the most popular slide I have in any presentation is, what is esports, right? And it's competitive multiplayer video games. Duh, right? But it's not. I mean, ultimately, we're talking about culture. Everybody here, we're part of the esports culture. But most of the people that are regulating this stuff, they've got other things to think about as well, right? They got to think about, business, finance, economy, all that kind of stuff. Other social issues as well, which I won't mention. So, when you talk about esports, it's a very small part of their overall sort of, worldview, right? So we have a responsibility to educate, and we have to do it in a way that meets them where they are. And I think that's the most important part.
And if I may, because Cody, you were going to ask us about US regulators anyway, so hopefully this is a natural segue into that topic. This indeed presents a regulatory challenge as well. So take in my home state these days, the Garden State, or as the New Yorkers call it, the garbage state as an example. The New Jersey DG, the gambling regulator, they started by having approved only a certain types or categories of esports, only certain titles. They're going one by one. Actually, at the same time, they did permit one of the big US hot dog eating competitions. So that's how they are approaching all this. So indeed, it's a matter of further education also for the regulators and the legislators who, if we can help it, will need to realize that there's much more to it than just that, as you guys called it, a holistic approach. Okay, we've permitted a couple of titles and a couple of tournaments, we've ticked the box, and the governor in Trenton, sticking to my example, will be happy because we're doing something about esports, the latest buzzword. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was going to jump on regulation, which is frankly the sexiest topic of our sexy panel. And I guess for those of you who don't know, in the US, sports betting is legal on a state-by-state basis. So in Connecticut, where I'm from, I can pop open my FanDuel app and place a $10 bet in an NBA match and lose it every time. Couldn't do that in Florida and other states where it's illegal because it is on a state-by-state basis. But Brett, you're right in the heart of this in Nevada, and I know Nevada is definitely a pioneer in that sense. So I'd love
Cody.
to hear your beta, right?
The state where Las Vegas is.
Las Vegas. How is the U.S., Nevada, progressed in the regulatory sort of lane over the last couple of years?
Sure. So I'll start with Nevada and then kind of expand from there. We have esports betting in Nevada. We have it largely started as event wagering. So every single time there was an event, you had to apply to the board to have permission to take wagers on this event, and then it was good for that event, and that was it. And on top of that, once it got approved, anybody could take wagers on it. So there were a whole bunch of things at play here. One, it's a lot of effort to get permission to take wagers on an event. So time, money, human resources, and then everybody else gets to reap the benefits of that. So when you have something, I mean, Martin mentioned now, we have a bit more consumer demand for things in esports betting. When this first launched in like 16, 17, well, maybe not. I mean, do you really want to go through all this effort to take in perhaps $200 in wagers? Probably not. You're spending more than that on getting approved. Since then, it's expanded a little bit more. There is still event wagering. That's largely what exists. We have whitelisted events. So once you've been approved as an event, now you can be added to the whitelist if approved for the whitelist. And there's also a whitelist of sanctioning organizations. So ESL, for example, could apply to be a sanctioning organization, sort of like NFL is an approved sanctioning organization. Currently on that list, there are 0. And on the whitelist of events, does anybody, this is fun, interactivity, right? Does anybody know what the one item on the whitelist is in Nevada?
I know.
You know? Oh, Cody, yes. Go for it. Yeah.
The
Cody's
golden
come
tea.
prepared. He's written all this.
It's golden tea.
Golden tea.
Who's heard of golden tea? Yes. Oh, I'm so thrilled. So it's an arcade game, right? It's an arcade game, and this competition was whitelisted, and now that every year that it's offered, it will be available on whitelist. So it's a somewhat arduous process. The example I always like to give, it's a little bit of an internet meme at this point, but have you seen the photo of Margaret Hamilton? She was an engineer who helped send people to the moon on Apollo 11. And there's a photograph of her standing next to the code that she wrote in order to send people to the moon. And the stack of binders is taller than she is. That's approximately the amount of paperwork you need to get for licensing in one state in the United States. And as Cody mentioned, we do it state by state in the United States, so you get to do that 50 times, or really 48, really at this point. And so that's kind of an attitude that comes in as you look at esports betting, particularly from a sports betting perspective in the US, and that's largely how esports has spread throughout the US at this time. I think we now actually have 14 states, if we include the last 2 weeks or so, as these have gone through. About half of the states that have passed sports betting laws since 2018 have included esports in some capacity. Some of these have been a little bit more limited in terms of getting these event wagers in. You have to apply one by one. Some are a bit more blanket, some are broader. New Jersey is certainly a much broader state than many others. And that's largely how it's gone. Sometimes it's been easy. For example, in West Virginia, they added on an esports element to a sports betting bill. It actually even passed without the governor's signature, which is a little odd. Almost the exact same wording came up in Iowa, where it was shot down in many ways because there was a lot of public opposition to having this as part of their betting bill. So it really depends where you go. It has spread significantly over the last few years, and in a fun way for all of us, right? We'll always have panels to sit on because it's different everywhere you go.
You know, there are 2 stages of this, right? So the thing is, like, for the first stage, we're all focused on the legislation and what the legislators are thinking, and that's great. It leads to some odd places where, like, sports betting is legal, but esports is explicitly banned, and that I will never understand. But the big fight now is with the actual regulators, right? Yes, you have the ability to actually offer sort of esports betting, but it really comes down to what the regulators, as Brett was saying, you know, what they understand, first of all, and what they will approve, right? And believe it or not, that's not a straightforward process either. And the regulators are also responding to public pressures, right? Not only from the governor's office, not only from legislators, but also public support and opposition. You have to understand the stakeholders in every state, right? And some places it's self-evident that you're going to have esports betting very soon, and in some places you're never going to get it because of the public opposition that's really out there. So really, it's a state-by-state analysis, and that's what makes America beautiful and complex and keeps lawyers employed. It's the fact that you have to do this 50 times, 48 times, a couple of different territories, and there is no one-size-fits-all. You can try to minimize that work as much as possible by being efficient, by bringing the right stakeholders together. But really, you're going to have to run this scenario multiple times, and you might get a different result every time.
And Martin, with
Technical break.
Martin, with your regulatory affair experience, you work in the U.S., Canada, LATAM. How does the U.S. sort of stack up against these other markets in terms of regulation? Is it more foreboding of esports, welcoming, or kind of how does it size up?
Well, indeed, there's up to 50, and for the record, let me get this right, esports betting-related shades of grey here. Now, having said that, if there is one person who would very likely convince even the likes of Utah and Alaska to permit gambling and sports betting, it's Dr. Brett Abarbanel. So I think the US, the country, state by state, but yeah, stacks up really well indeed. Around 14 states, not all of them have launched esports betting offering just yet. To Jason's point about the regulators, but it's a very, very good start. Of course, we might need to throw other factors into the particular mix or this equation, which is games of chance, games of skill. Where do we stand on all this? And where is the line between genuine free-to-play games and games whereby you're invited to buy loot boxes and other in-app or make other in-app purchases? So we've got that massive cauldron, and we're trying to deal with that. And indeed, it keeps the people on this panel, I'm sure, in the room as well, both frustrated, but at the same time entertained. And most importantly, it keeps us in the job. But going beyond the United States, looking at Canada, well, yet another regulatory tapestry, if you will. They're going province by province. As you might know, Ontario's just taken the plunge, haven't plucked up the courage, and it has regulated online gambling, and esports markets are permitted. The other provinces have been watching Ontario very, very closely, and they're yet to take the proverbial leap of faith. Then, and finally, when it comes to Latin America, actually Brazil, and hopefully I have a God-given right to say that, having been married to a Brazilian girl for some time. For once, Brazil is ahead of the game, because it will regulate sports betting. You can quote me on it even this year, and esports is expected to be included. At the same time, skill-based games have been permitted in Brazil as so-called gaming contracts for a number of years by now. So really, it's not, and my fellow panelists have made that point very pertinently, it's not one size fits all, so do come and speak to your legal advisors, because they're the ultimate winners. You might need to keep paying them for their advice. There's no other way around it.
Excellent. Thank you all for the lay of the land on the regulatory side. That was very helpful. And I think we touched a little bit about sort of the educational gap between regulators and operators in terms of esports. 5 guys running around shooting people, in your words, Martin. And so I'll start with Vlastimil for this, but I'd love to know, so on the other side of this, are there ways that the gaming industry, esports industry, can accommodate gambling in a better way? So I guess one example would be, how would publishers getting involved benefit this space? Is that one sort of avenue that could help, and how?
Yeah, there are multiple ways how publishers can interact with gambling industry. You can think about publishers like NFL, NHL, and NBA, right? And they don't have money, they have problem to take money from betting companies for sponsorship and so on. NFL has some exclusive deals, selling data from matches and so on. So the publishers can also participate on this by, being open about data, selling data to bookmakers. For us, for companies like Odin, calculate odds, push it to bookmakers. they can participate in the growth of the esports betting as well. So these are ways how publishers can, be more involved in this and participate in the growth. And of course, different publishers have different taste, how they want to approach it and how much they want to be connected with betting and so on, because it still has stigma. We have touched this, and some of them don't want to be connected with it at all. Some of them don't care. Some of them are more pragmatic and just waiting for the right time when the price is good. So the approach is changing. The publishers want to speak with us, but still not all of them, and there is still a lot of work which needs to be done, and the industry needs to grow as a whole before publishers will accept betting and gambling as part of their day-to-day business.
I think to respond to that as well, it really depends, right? I mean, not every publisher is really invested in their esports scene. Riot obviously is, but Valve arguably not as much, right? And so it really depends on what they want to do, right? And we have to remember that publishers are in the business of selling video games, right? Esports is a secondary business for them, and betting would be tertiary for them, right? So one could argue that their biggest responsibility is actually to have a very good game that has integrity at the heart of it, right? But even that is difficult sometimes to do. So I think it really depends on the publisher, on the title, on the culture of the game itself, and then I think there needs to be a support community around it, which is being built to really make that shine on the betting app.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been told we have about 5 minutes left, so we can keep going unless people in the crowd have any questions. Happy to take a question. Okay. So last question, I really wanted to get this off before the panel, and man, this has flown by, but esports still represents a fraction of operators' revenue right now, like less than a fraction even. They're obviously right now prioritizing national partnerships with major traditional sports leagues, investing in content around it. So esports is very much playing bridesmaid to all that. So I'd just love to hear everyone's opinion, and Brett, we can start with you on why should traditional operators, big retail operators, invest or pay attention to esports right now? What's the benefit?
So I don't think that they necessarily have to. I think this is something that an operator by operator choice, right? This is a space where it can be really difficult to get into, and if you don't fully understand it, I think everyone in this room will agree, if you don't fully understand this thing, why are you jumping in with a ton of money? It often will welcome it, right? I mean, look at some of the things that esports has done over the last decade or so. But there's a lot going on that can be very confusing and very difficult. And the most valuable thing that a regulated gambling operator owns is their license. So the last thing that they want to do is screw that up. And esports is still in a very nascent space. So an operator really has to have a handle on what it is and what it can be to really be able to make that plunge. It can be done something like, I'll use an example from our panel, like Entain buying a company like Unicorn and bringing in all of the understanding and elements that come in from there. It can be something where they're building it from the ground up and creating their own trading desk. If you look at a group like Pinnacle, which started doing this in 2010, and they're still learning and adapting as they continue onward. I think that these are incredibly important to keep in mind. And I don't think it's necessarily the right choice for every major bookmaker to jump into esports right away. I think it all could be done. Every bookmaker could do this. But I think they really need to weigh who you are and what you want to accomplish before stepping in. And then I guess to reiterate what everybody else has said, consult your legal advisor to make sure that you're doing it in a way that protects you and then also protects the consumers that you're trying to attract to your product.
For me, it comes down to the future, right? I mean, nobody's doing it for the market that's there now, right? That's clear. There's just too much complexity. There's too much uncertainty. It's a huge pain in the rear, really, at the end of the day, for the current sort of market that exists now. But where will it be 5 years from now? Where will it be 10 years from now? Do you believe that Gen Z is looking for different experiences and different entertainment options? And every company under the sun, every entertainment company is betting on that. Well, if that's what you believe, that's where you have to be. And you can't jump in 5 years from now and say, we've been in this space all along. You have to jump in now. And of course, there's risk associated with that, but you have to look at the overall market and what it can bear. And I have to say, people are pretty bullish on esports betting for, I think, a number of good reasons. And if you're not certain about that, again, consult your legal advisor.
For the record, I would first of all say that Jason has not asked us to keep referring to legal difficulties to generate new business for him. But if anything results out of the panel, I'm hopeful that we'll get some commission. And to address your question, I would tend to agree with my fellow panelists to the effect that it's not a must. I believe that esports betting will give rise to a lot of niche opportunities, especially in jurisdictions that are much more innovative in their regulatory approach, such as Tennessee, that seems to be the cold run for all these startups. You don't need a partner, although the entry costs are quite high, but that is the place. At the same time, indeed, to your point about the future, and that's why I believe sports betting is the next natural step to be followed by esports betting. If you look around, with all due respect, any casino floor, the exact age of the patrons is not necessarily 32. I reckon the casinos will need to start addressing the demographical issue that they will have had before they know it.
I completely agree. This is one of the big issues for casinos. And I would just make a step back. Like, if you look on esports betting globally, it's huge. It can be third, fourth biggest sport in the sportsbook portfolio. And this will happen in the US as well, right? So this is just a question of regulation and time. And if you are a sportsbook, you probably should invest in the future. I guess we can agree on that, right? So you should start doing something with eSport because you need to learn what to do and how to do it. It will take time, and if you will start sooner, then you will be ahead and you will know more and then you can apply it and so on. And I believe that it will be like 50 different cases of how to do eSport because some states will be big in League of Legends, some states will be big on CSGO and so on. And then you need to have a proper, grassroots there, community, support the community, give something back, and something like this, and it will take time. And there's definitely a big space to big platforms, big providers to actually grow in the industry, grow with the industry, and be part of it, and give something back to community, and the community will reward you. Because the esports and gaming community is very rewarding, but it's very demanding as well. So when you are able to address it, able to address the needs of the community, they will reward you, but if not, they will really punish you.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I'm hearing from all of you and sort of my theory is that the esports consumer, 18 to 35-year-old individual roughly, is far more valuable for the sportsbook operators and a lot of other folks than the esports bettor, at least at this time, right? So a lot of folks that are esports specific books are, adding traditional sports elements to their books and products and markets like that because they're pulling them in with esports and then, then they have all the traditional sports products to wager on. But I'm far over time at this point. Cam's given me this, which means I'm done for. So thank you all for joining us today, and thanks for sticking around, guys, and listening to the panel today. And hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.